Musician Prince serves as the blueprint of an amazing artistic career and how we can conduct ourselves as artists. But he also represents how we can handle our business to make sure that we have a legacy well beyond ourselves. In fact, there's certain lessons from him that we are still using today, many years after him passing away. The first lesson is to make sure you know your music rights, your intellectual property rights, and make sure you keep them because they are naturally your rights. We go back to when Prince signed his contract back in the late 70s, around the time I was born. There was no SoundCloud, there was no YouTube, there was no mixtape revolution as I saw later on in the 90s and the aughts when I was around. Instead, if you wanted to get your music played on mainstream folks, you had to go through the radio. Who on the radio? The major distributors and the major publishers. So he really didn't have much of a choice but to sign that deal. But when he started getting big with the album Controversy, and then had another breakthrough with 1999, but particularly when he hit with Purple Rain, having the #1 movie and the #1 album at the exact same time. I think he was the first person to do that. Then suddenly he realized the numbers weren't adding up. He didn't have as much control over his brand as he thought.
You can put out a record. SoundScan refuses to count as many as they actually sell. Meanwhile, when you go overseas and you check some of the barcodes and titles over there, they've already ripped you off. Also, the influx of the internet, those sales. So we never really knew what Purple Rain sold. I don't know to this date. I only know what they tell me.
So being at that time #1 artist arguably in the world, he started a protest. He went as far as to write "slave" on his face, which if you're around at that time, it was a striking and intense thing to happen. He was able to fight his way out of that contract and start doing independent work. But that fight itself ended up inspiring his peers, such as George Michael, who was going through the same type of thing as an 80s artist going into the 90s, as recently as Kanye West trying to get out of their contracts and get their masters back, which is their intellectual property. Up until his death, he became an advocate for the indie hustle. And someone like myself, who I own my own publishing company, I'm talking to you on my own TV station, he's been an inspiration for that as far as protecting our intellectual property rights. The second thing is connecting directly to your consumer. Now, this isn't that unusual. If you think of like the Grateful Dead back in the 60s, 70s, 80s until they disbanded, all the way up to more recent acts. Connecting and, selling it out of the trunk, as they used to say, when you're selling your CDs, whatever, out of the trunk, that's actually not a new thing. However, Prince was different because he leveraged technology and he happened to be in the age where we could do so. So he was one of the first music artists to have a regular newsletter/email list, and he was definitely one of the first mainstream artists to actually sell music directly from his website. We're talking years before Spotify. We're talking about before the founder of Spotify probably was even born. So doing that hand-to-hand directly aesthetic, where you're connecting directly to your audience, and as a result of that, you're actually making more of the money because there's not the middleman there.
Crystal Ball sold upwards of 200,000 copies at $50 a pop. 200,000 copies by industry standards would be a failure, but when you take the lion's share of the profit.
Number 3, it's about taking the audience not where they say they want to go, but where they need to go. Now think about it. In 1983, 1984, 1985, Prince was arguably the biggest artist in the world. Again, had the #1 movie and the #1 album at the exact same time. And then what did he do? He did Under a Cherry Moon, which was this unusual album and even stranger movie, but had these classics on there, like Kiss, and my personal favorite, Sometimes It Snows in April. Totally different than the tune, literally, of Purple Rain. Then we have Around the World in a Day. But then later on you have Diamonds and Pearls, Sign of the Times, one of the most unusual albums to come out at that period of time, and that was just a few years after Purple Rain. The point is that you have to know where your audience needs to go and then take them there. However, if you ask your audience, particularly after a hit, what they want next, they're going to say a sequel. If you ask me what I want after Purple Rain, I'd say more Purple Rain. But instead he gave us something different.
You'll hear a lot of talk about, will he ever match the success of such and such and such and such? I'm not on that road.
As a creator, as an artist, if you're going to be moving the cultural needle, you need to move your audience to where they're slightly uncomfortable because you're meeting them in the future. Now, before you get into all this stuff that Prince is doing, you actually have to have your contracts right. and understand how intellectual property as well as passive income works. Be sure and check my beginner's guide on intellectual property as well as having your contracts right so you can go further into this process.